Let's bring in Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan. And with a good morning to you, and thank you for joining me on a holiday. I know that you heard Sarah Huckabee Sanders the other day say that this whole Stephon Clark shooting issue, it's a local matter. So I want to get your take on the broader question of why the Justice Department seems to be reluctant to look at these cases. I mean, how do you see it?
Well, I don't know why the Justice Department is reluctant to look at it, but I think it's a national problem. I think it's a tragedy what happened in California. It's a tragedy what's happened in other cities around this country. When you look at Freddie Gray in Baltimore, when you look at what happened in Missouri, when you look at what's happened in the South. And I think I think that sometimes we have to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and don't understand what it is like to be a young black man in America, and that you are instantly profiled, that you are instantly feared. And at night, when someone sees, if I as a white woman versus a black man, there's an different assumption. We have to do something about it. We've got a real crisis in this country.
In terms of doing something about it, I want to play for you what former NBA star Charles Barkley said last night, this with regard to addressing the problems like police brutality in communities of color. Here it is.
We as black people have not held Democrats accountable for taking our votes for all these years. If you're going to have us vote for you, we got to start holding them accountable. Our neighborhoods are not better. Our schools are not better. Crime is not better. So we got to start holding these politicians accountable.
Charles Barkley has been saying this for several years. We heard the very same sentiment most recently during the 2016 fight for the Democratic nomination. What is your reaction to what he's saying?
Well, I think the Democratic Party has taken a lot of people for granted, but I think that he is absolutely right. And I think these elections, you know, this gets very detailed. Black Americans are voting people to represent them in Congress and state legislators, and they need to hold those people accountable, and they tend to live right in that neighborhood, and they need to build a coalition that can make a difference. But then, you know, when you see statewide races for governor or for senator, or when you see a presidential election race, everybody assumes that that block of people are going to vote. Well, what are we doing to help them? We have a cycle that's still, it's the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. And we've made progress in some ways, but in many ways we haven't made progress. And I think, I remember seeing Martin Luther King 3 weeks before he died. He was in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I was young, but I'll never forget that night. I think we really have to talk about this. Race is still a very difficult conversation to have in this country, but we need to talk about it because we're not going to address the problem until we talk about what's sitting there.
I want to get your take rather on what's next in the fight against gun violence, because as you know, there are now more than a dozen companies that have cut their ties to Laura Ingraham for her attacks against the Parkland shooting survivor David Hogg. Do you think it's too naive to believe that these companies intend to become more aggressive players in the gun reform battle? But is that what it's going to take? Is it the power of the purse that may make the difference?
I think it's the power of everything. So the power of the purse is responding to the emotions that the kids have brought out in many people. What I think has changed this time is that people aren't going to their same old corners, and everybody has the same fight and nobody does anything. You know, I've always said that the power of the NRA, yes, they make political donations, but I don't think that that's their power because they're the same amount as many others. The power is that they're single issue voters. Well, I think you're seeing a lot of people energized. Kids don't want to go to school and be afraid. Parents don't want their children to go to school and be afraid. And I think there are a lot of people in America that don't want to take the guns away from everybody in this country, but we need to do some very common sense policies that will make sure that we can attack gun violence in this country.
I know that you've been taking on the Trump administration all this week with the proposed changes to the census form that includes a question about citizenship. Are you willing to give the administration the benefit of the doubt that the question may be truly meant to provide adequate funding and congressional representation?
Well, if we were actually talking about adequate money, we would be trying to find out what's the real. This census is the most important document we get every 10 years to get a real picture of who is living in this country, where they are living, and it drives so many things. You know, one of the other issues, I was already fighting one issue when the citizenship issue popped, and I actually had a mixed reaction to it, and I mentioned it on this show a month ago, was that we were supposed to, I mean, there had been years put into including a question on Mid-Eastern and North African background, if people came from that background. Well, it had been a draft and proposal had been put out a year ago to include that category, and the administration in the last few weeks had said that it was going to drop that. Now, I think that there are many people in this country that probably had mixed feelings about that category as well. But we need to know who's living here. We need to know what the demographics of the population are. We need to have a lot of questions answered. And that a lot of people are going to be afraid to answer questions on the census, and I think it's not going to result in an accurate document.
Yeah. Well, on a much lighter note, before I let you go, Villanova, Michigan tomorrow night in the NCAA. I don't even have to ask. I'm just going to say enjoy the game.
Hey, I'm in my blue. Go blue. I went to the Easter Vigil right after the win last night because I love Sister Jean. John Dingell loves Sister Jean. But God loves us all.
Well, it's a very good point. I know it's going to be a great game tomorrow night.